I'm not sure I have a useful definition above and beyond the ordinary definition of, I guess, literature that is fictional, but it involves science, or is about science, or uses science. I guess it has also futuristic aspects, science fiction. Although you can also write science fiction about the past. But to me, perhaps the most interesting distinction is science fiction writers that use the technology, meaning that their narratives are metaphysically possible. So some of them actually spend a lot of time learning certain things in physics, and because they want what they write to make physical sense. And I like this kind of genre because I think that science itself, the way it is quite fantastic. I mean, if you go to the border of science, that's where a lot of fantasy resides, and it's nice to incorporate that into your story. And on the other hand, you can have science fiction that is more, that doesn't really pay attention so much to the facts or to the possibilities, a bit wilder, and so on and so forth. Well, it's a very difficult question. I think of it more as a concept that doesn't exactly apply to something in the world in the same way, for example, that a shoe or a stair, meaning if I look at your black shoe, then I have a concept of something that is in the world. Okay, it's got the traditional philosophical problems, but it's more. However, when you say intelligence, it is a very useful concept, but it doesn't necessarily refer to something in the world which is clear. So I would think of it more as some kind of a radical plurality. But the question itself is very interesting. So I would start, for example, with a less ambitious question that can help us understand what's going on. Because one way of answering it is simply by relating it to survival. So if you look at evolution, in a sense, evolution produces intelligent systems because they're better at surviving. Now, our intelligence levels is like that we could perhaps survive an oncoming meteor that would hit planet Earth, which the dinosaurs were not intelligent enough to survive, right? Now we're much more intelligent, and because you can even use something called predictive coding, meaning if you can make predictions that are more accurate and more far-ranging, then you're in some sense more intelligent. That is, if you can predict what's going to happen. And that's one way of measuring intelligence. So, for example, you can predict an incoming meteor because of my world model that includes telescopes and astronomy, and also I may have ways to divert it because of, let's say, nuclear weapons and so on and so forth. So my intelligence level has risen to the point that I can make predictions that increase my survivability as a race. So it's interesting to compare us to the dinosaurs in that respect. So definitions of intelligence are based on survivability are very interesting, but they're slow. However, you can have intelligence that is defined by problem solving. So for example, intelligence is a cluster of cognitive capacities. And now, because it's very important if I want to say, is this AI more intelligent than this AI? Can AI become more intelligent than a human? So obviously the question is, what is intelligence? What are you talking about? How can you tell the difference? But there are ways. So for example, again, I go to the beginning of what I was trying to say is that you do something like mathematics. Say, what is mathematical intelligence? And already here, you have very different ideas. It's a very rich field, and perhaps, but it's better defined. And then you can actually use problem solving. So I can have two computers, and give them a cluster of 100 problems that cover completely different areas of math, and then perhaps see which one of them solves the problems better. And then I could talk about mathematical, and here already there's some fascinating disagreements. Lucas in 1961 already, an English mathematician, who said that human mathematicians can solve certain problems that computers cannot. that human mathematical intuition is something that cannot be simulated on a computer. And this way of thinking was picked up by Roger Penrose in 1994. The same kind of claim that human intelligence somehow is something that, in the case of Penrose, he was talking about the fact that human intelligence has to do with non-algorithmic processes, both of them perhaps. And therefore, if it's non-algorithmic, then a machine could not emulate it. But these opinions are today not taken too seriously because there are a lot of good reasons to think that computer mathematical intelligence and intuition even will pretty soon probably surpass that of human mathematicians. But it's a very interesting question, but I'm just to say, you see how it's more interesting in this more restricted sense. And once you solve this one, maybe you can look at more general types of intelligence. It doesn't have so much to do with my expectations as much as with my personal affinity. And this question reminds me of a story, and perhaps this is the one that I find, the sci-fi scenario that I find the most fascinating, is based on a story by Isaac Asimov that he himself thought was his best story, maybe, which is great. Very interesting to see him say that, and it is called The Last Question. The Last Question. I recommend it. You can get it on the internet for free. It's a short story. It's a fascinating story about entropy, and it begins with two kind of nerds sitting in a computation room talking about the computers of the future. The point is that the computer starts evolving. It's very similar to singularity scenarios. But while singularity scenarios are more epistemological, where it is knowledge itself that suddenly explodes, here the knowledge processing explosion in those computers, as they become more and more evolved, actually turns into an ontological singularity, which is completely different. This is something that happens in a black hole. And this means that the information density somehow becomes big enough. But the most important thing there is that he also plays with space and time. And in the end, you end up with this entity that is outside of space and time. And then for a time that there's no time, there's nothing. And then suddenly you hear a voice, "Let there be light." It's a very beautiful ending. And if you read the whole story, I cannot do it justice now, but it is close to my view, especially of consciousness, meaning that consciousness could perhaps be even an unintended consequence of an intelligence explosion. And this is, it's a certain view. It's not necessarily a very popular view, but it goes well with the story, and it also goes well with people that think that consciousness is really some kind of a physical process that we don't fully understand well enough. But we don't have many options. It can be something that happens inside space and time, something that unfolds in space and time, like ordinary physical processes. It can be something which is completely outside of space and time, but then you'd be stuck with dualism, which is okay. But now it's very hard to understand how something outside of space and time can affect things inside space and time. There's just no, you can invent completely new theories, but, and it would be almost impossible to explain how a person says, "I am conscious." If I declare, "I am conscious," if my consciousness caused me to make this statement, then somehow this thing outside space and time affected my vocal cords. And so you're entering a very difficult philosophical issues. The third position, which I might find the most fascinating, and this is what Asimov is really playing around with, is different approaches to space and time. That space and time is much richer and more complex than we imagine, that it is actually not primitive. It can be built from information, and this is, or modern physics is beginning to point in this direction. It's very interesting. And once you take this avenue of playing around with the physics of space and time, I really believe that if consciousness somehow depends on new physics, which is even hard for us to contemplate at the moment, then that physics probably has to do with the meeting time of information and more modern ways of looking at space and time. And this is exactly what that story was leading to, but in a different way. So for me, it's a satisfying story, and if I were to choose one sci-fi scenario that I find the most exciting or personally rewarding, then this is the one that I would embrace. So again, you have a chance, read it seriously. It's like half an hour. It's great. It's also about the second law of thermodynamics. I think, for example, that personal avatars are going to appear a lot sooner than people realize, maybe within 10 years or something. And then they will evolve very quickly. And what I mean by personal avatars, and the reason I'm saying that, because to answer your question in a way which is reasonable, I cannot jump 20, 30 years ahead. It's just, even that is nowadays is a little difficult. And so you want to have some continuity in your projection of the near future and the middle future. And so I would start with something like Algebra 1. Okay? So let's say that you teach Algebra 1. Today, Algebra 1 is taught in a certain way. They're beginning to have some kind of virtual tutors, but very, 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 very primitive ones, okay? But the point is that already, in 5 years, I believe that you actually will have virtual tutors that will follow students from a young age. And then, for example, if I want to teach Algebra 1, then for each problem, if a student cannot solve it, then it's very easy to create AIs that will break the problem into its components. And by using predictive coding, we'll be able to, or we try to predict what the student will do each time. And then if the prediction fails, the surprise is too big, it goes into something even more basic. So for example, if I give a student some complicated question that involves solving an equation of the second degree, then a system like this could easily break it apart into its components and find out the student actually has problems with fractions. And then it will be able to give him a lot of similar problems, find out even within fractions. The idea is always, when I teach physics, I teach my students to the art of taking complicated problems and breaking it into their components just to identify their own ignorance. So you can say, okay, the reason I cannot solve this problem, if you're honest with yourself, is because of this part. Okay, great. Go back and to a book 2 years ago, and maybe then you find out, I really have problems with fractions. Okay, great. So if you use this kind of approach, very quickly you can have, and we will have, educational system that will not only do averaging and help the teacher with the data, but will actually follow students individually. And by actually working with them, and work from 2nd grade until 12th grade, the same artificial eye of the same student, it will also collect cognitive data about the student. If in the old days when you make a mistake, you throw the mistake in the wastebasket, in the future these mistakes will be very, very important. Same thing with the medical field, if you're familiar with medical institutions that have discarded of patient data for years, and now they're crying because this is like gold. Because once you have this big data, you can use deep learning and algorithms that will really help your hospital with reducing the cost with the patients, making predictions. So what I'm saying, data that used to be thrown away, today is considered gold. Cognitive data is being thrown away all the time. So once you have a database that includes cognitive data, and you have a database, for example, including genetic data, and you have a database that includes proteomic data on distribution of certain proteins in your blood, and maybe another one that has to do with brain circuitry, it will be much more efficient to combine these databases into a single database. Now you're getting closer and closer to your own avatar. Now you include some behavioral data that has been accumulated. And the reason why these avatars are important, for example, is take something like cancer. Let's say that person has cancer, and it's just there are just thousands of things that could have gone wrong. And you cannot treat the person, but you can take the avatar, which is really a simulation of the biological state of the person, and use thousands and thousands of different drugs and different combinations, and use methods that eventually will identify some approach that produces the kind of effect that you want, and then you can go to the person and heal the person. But people that will not want to have these avatars, with all the information about them, are going to have a much harder time also dealing with, even if they will have the freedom to reject it, they probably will embrace it for different reasons. Of course, so what I'm saying is that there are reasons why relatively soon we are going to have personal copies of ourselves. It will be virtual. And then these copies will be able to roam the worldwide net, interact with other copies. For example, if you want to go on a date and the avatars meet each other, you see eight of them are boring and they look in the cell phone all the time, and one is, you like him, okay. So it's just, so there are many reasons to have such systems, and also you're beginning to collect a lot of data about yourself as an entity. So you could have, perhaps these avatars could have legal rights, they could have property rights, and so on and so forth. And also it will be some kind of a virtual sarcophagus after you die. Then you have this virtual entity that your offsprings will be able to relate to. You'll be the elder of the tribe or something. And I don't know if you personally will still be there, probably not. But it's still interesting so these entities will be able to continue to exist on the World Wide Web and also accumulate more information from their own experiences and accumulate improvements. So this is just one prediction. There are a lot of others. I already do. I mean, this Waze, for example, I've come to completely trust it. It works in every country, and it's excellent. I told you it's based on input that comes from, so if you have, let's say, in the city of Berlin, right now, 100,000 cars on the road, then each one of these cars that has Waze broadcasts to a satellite that analyzes the pattern. And then you can almost see a live pattern of the traffic. And you use this to direct the individual cars. So it's got both top-down and bottom-up processes. It works very well. Anyway, but the point is that it's beginning to affect my cognitive capacity. Once I like to navigate and look at the map and everything, like the old people, you know. And now, so in the future, you know, I imagine that I would, but it depends. Certain things I would not. It depends. You know that in the present there are tremendous problems here, right? Meaning that you actually have artificial intelligence systems that translate or takes a lot of, they can take, let's say, Ulysses by James Joyce and break it apart and simplify it for you and use your own idioms and completely change the book. Or there's a lot of educational material where a lot of, let's say, classical books are being censored, the parts that are politically incorrect are being removed, and a lot of it is illegal, a lot of it is it's like the Wild West. And so you have a lot of fake literature that you're getting out there, which is exactly, see, as soon as AIs are beginning to create literary content, then it becomes problematic. So first of all, if someone came to me and said, look, there's this AI and it can actually write just like James Joyce, if you want a new novel, maybe 10, then I don't know, I would be a bit apprehensive. On the other hand, who knows? I mean, but if I really wanted to, I would start with Wilhelm Busch, with Max and Moritz. I'd like a couple more Max and Moritz. When people talk about the singularity and they talk about all these amazing computer systems and huge databases and deep learning and so on and so forth, and how these things will evolve and self-amplify and completely change the field. Usually people add, so for example, when it comes to the singularity, when David Chalmers does the philosophical analysis with singularity, he always writes absent defeaters, meaning, now what are defeaters? Wars, viruses, I don't know, getting hit by, or suddenly maybe a gamma ray that comes from outer space, or there are all kinds of things, but especially social phenomena that have to do perhaps with human greed and our fallibility. And there are, statistically, if you look at so-called black swan events, then there are just a lot of things that could drag the whole thing or stop this evolution and actually send us back. And for example, you can think about medicine. So with things like augmentation, some people are familiar with CRISPR. It is, in genetics, it's now the new thing where you can actually use this technology to really manipulate genes and manipulate offsprings. As a matter of fact, it's such a powerful technique. I know there's a moratorium on it where people try to understand what's going on before we use it. And so let's say that you use some versions of CRISPR and included with augmentation, where you can maybe introduce little implants into your brain that communicate with the library directly and with. So what I'm saying, and also having better avatars, that you're going to begin to have a certain social stratification. So maybe some people will live 200 years and will be much richer, and their offsprings will have much greater memory and abstraction of powers, and you can see where it's going, and you get a social stratification, different distinct layers that are created by technology, computer technology, biological technology, and so on and so forth. And that could create tremendous unrest. You can have politicians that will, maybe someone say, hey, why should he live 200 a year and I should only live 80? What's going on here? I mean, even if I'm being promised basic health care, better than what I'm getting today, maybe someone else, if you're rich enough and powerful enough, now you have access to these technologies that other people don't. So you could have all kinds of social unrest. You can have also, another problem has to do with different countries. Let's say that in the United States, you're going to have a moratorium on certain technologies that are deemed dangerous or destabilizing. Then let's say China keeps working on them to achieve superiority. Now you don't have a choice. Meaning so they're going to be all kinds of problems that could probably stop all this business, especially if you look at the past. Any kind of exponential phenomenon always reaches some kind of an end. Okay, I have a dream. I like history and I like art, but I would like, first of all, I'd like to see AIs that can roam the internet and create things for me on the fly. Meaning, so for example, I can have an AI and I tell it, okay, today, I want to see what the Crusaders did in Akko, really. I want to understand what's going on. I've been there, I've seen the walls, but a lot of the signs are broken and I don't have good books, and the AI goes to the World Wide Web and makes a little movie for me. Now, there's absolutely no reason why this should happen pretty soon. And collect a lot of relevant pieces of video and actually edit a beautiful movie exactly on the prompt that I'm interested in. Not only this, because it's on the fly, it could do this at different levels of resolution. So if I want to stop next to some wall in a video and I see an interesting hall or something, I can ask the AI, then the AI will immediately look for more information about that region, meaning that resolution itself becomes an extra dimension. So you have space, time, and resolutions, and you can move in all these dimensions with an AI on the go. Or if I want to visit Barcelona or something like this, I'd like to have a virtual where I can just create my surrounding on the go. If I go to a good restaurant, I can enter, I can go into his wine cellar, I can go to a specific bottle, and I want to know everything about that bottle. And so you can have systems that will do that. And so this will be a lot of fun for me. All kinds of questions that I have, then, and you can do it with artists. I would do it with Emil Node, for example. And the computer will just go and look for his papers, his writings, other people's writing, all of his works, everything, and edit it for me. But not too much for me, because unfortunately now there's also a movement where Google and Facebook, for example, create content that is centered around you, giving you the feeling that you can reach everything, but in a way you're kind of locked into a part of the system. But yeah, something like that.